thanks for coming, and thanks for coming back if you've been here over the last couple of lunchtimes. If you haven't, just worth saying that they're being videoed now, so you can get previous talks in the series on Facebook, and people will be posting them, and hopefully you'll pick one up that way. I want to share with you one of the strangest things that happens in Jesus' life. And it's recorded here in Mark's Gospel, one of the eyewitness biographies of Jesus. And we've been encouraging people today this week to take these away and read them for yourself and look into the person of Jesus in the first century as he's described by those who knew him well, who spent their lives with him, who actually, many of them were martyred for their testimony about him. If you've never looked into Jesus, please do that. Please take this away. It takes about an hour or two to read. But we've just been dipping into little parts of it during these lunchtimes. And I want to take you to a bit that I think is very strange, and certainly that Jesus' followers found very perplexing. And it's on page 35. Maybe you can find it. It's on the left-hand column, page 35, where it has the bold title. The disciples were confused as Jesus led them towards Jerusalem, and his other followers were afraid. They found it perplexing, puzzling, because they knew that Jerusalem was the headquarters of the religious establishment, the same religious establishment that Jesus had clashed with repeatedly and that had plotted his death. And we read earlier in the account how they were beginning to conspire how they might destroy Jesus. And everyone knows, therefore, that Jerusalem is about the riskiest place you could go to. Jesus can carry on his ministry in the country. He's popular with the ordinary people. He's popular with the outcasts, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, the frauds, because he offers them compassion and forgiveness. He's unpopular with the religious people. We said that yesterday. It might be a surprise to you if you find religious people difficult and religion hypocritical, then you're in good company, because Jesus hated corrupt religion, hypocritical, empty religion. And everyone knew that he clashed with the religious authorities, and everyone knew that their headquarters was Jerusalem. And so, look down again at that quote, the disciples were confused as Jesus led them towards Jerusalem. Jesus is going to be very dangerous, he's going to be very risky. Do you not know that the people in Jerusalem are plotting to destroy you? Why are we going there? They must have been thinking. Once again, Jesus took the 12 disciples aside and told them what was going to happen to him. He said, "We are now on our way to Jerusalem, where the Son of Man," that's his title for himself, "the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law of Moses. They will sentence him to death and hand him over to foreigners who will make fun of him and spit on him. They will beat him and kill him. But 3 days later he will rise to life." The very strange thing about Jesus' life is that he planned his death. It wasn't that he went to Jerusalem optimistically thinking, maybe I can teach them the right way, maybe I can teach them the essence of true religion, to love God and to love your neighbour, and maybe they'll be persuaded. No, he went to Jerusalem knowing very well what would happen to him when he went there. When I get to Jerusalem, I'll be handed over to chief priests, I'll be sentenced to death, they'll beat me, spit on me, and kill me. So let's go to Jerusalem, everyone. Off we go. And the disciples are very perplexed about it. See, whatever you make of Jesus, whatever your view of him is, whether you think he's an inspiring teacher, a great moral example, whether you think he was a con man who tricked people into worshipping him, whatever your view is of Jesus, you've got to reckon with his death and the fact that he planned to die. He was quite deliberate about going to his death. Not because he was miserable or depressed or masochistic, but because he knew that his death was, as he writes later in the Gospel, it was necessary. It was written. It was prophesied. It must happen. And the question we're addressing this lunchtime is why? Why did Jesus have to die? The best man who's ever lived, the most beautiful example ever set, yet cut off at the relatively young age of what people estimate about 33 years old. Cut off in the prime of his ministry with the greatest following, did wonderful miracles to help people, to heal them, and yet died young and said that he must die. Why was that? Why did he have to die in that way? I'm hoping this will start with the 10 o'clock, we'll plough on. I'll tell you about a conversation I had with a Muslim friend. Well, he was a new friend. I just met him on a train. We got chatting. It was the train actually from London to Bristol, so a couple of hours, and we were getting pretty well. And we worked out he was a Muslim, I was a Christian, and we got talking about that. I said to him, tell me, what do you believe happens as a Muslim when you die? Well, he says, when I die, we'll face God in judgment, and he will decide my eternal future, either in paradise or in damnation. And I said to him, I'm a Christian, I believe something very similar, that there will be a judgment and that we will go to either heaven or hell. So I said to him, as a Muslim, what do you believe will make the difference between which destination you end up in? And he said, well, Muslims, we believe that on each of our shoulders there's an angel who records our deeds that we do during our life. So one angel, I can't remember which way around they are, but one angel records the good stuff we do, the other angel records all the bad stuff we do. And at the end of our life, the angels feed in their reports and Allah weighs them in the scales, the good against the bad. And if the good outweighs the bad, then it's life. And if the bad outweighs the good, then it's damnation. And I said to him, well, suppose when we get to Bristol, we get up Temple Meads and you're not looking where you're going, you're crossing the road, and you die, and that happens tonight, this weighing of scales. How do you think you would do? And I remember, the reason I remember this conversation, it must have been 8 or 9 years ago now, but I remember it so clearly because he would say, stop, be honest about it. I remember him saying to me after a long pause, I don't think I'd make it. If it was today, I don't like my chances. I thought that was unusually honest about moral faith. He was like a very nice guy, hadn't murdered anyone as far as I knew, but just had that honesty about his own conscience, that if there is a God who is just and who is holy, and who sees the secrets of my heart and weighs them, I'm not confident that he would be impressed with what he found. I said to him, what about in, let's say you don't go to a bus today, hope you won't, but it's like 20, 30 years' time, how do you think your chance will change? He said, I don't know. I might try and get to Mecca to do a pilgrimage, and I'll do my best to follow the pillars of Islam as I can, but I don't know. And then he said to me, which is a fair reply, really, he goes, well, what about if you go on a bus? We were kind of exchanging going on a bus. And I said, well, actually, if I go into a bus today, then I'm going to go to paradise. And he said to me, how do you know? Are you really that confident in your moral performance? Or does Christianity really have standards that are that low? You can be sure. And I said to him, no, I'm sure because of what happened when Jesus died on the cross. Let me explain. We said yesterday that Jesus is pessimistic about our human nature. We're capable of love and beauty because God made us in his image. But actually, so frequently, we're guilty of falling short of our own standards and certainly falling short of the purpose for which God made us, to love God with all of our heart and our mind and soul and strength, and to love our neighbour as ourselves. See, on that criterion, some of the people say, well, I can be a good person without being a Christian. Well, probably you can. Some of my friends who aren't Christians are lovely people. But if we were designed, if the purpose for which we were made by God who's given us everything was to love him with all of ourselves, then none of us have done that. None of us, I suspect, have come close to that. Certainly I realised when I was at university beginning to look into these things, I'd barely given God the time of day. It wasn't that I'd set out in my life to be particularly wicked, tried to live by my conscience, although I often failed. But when it came to the God who made the world, it was an irrelevance to me. But if you think about it for a moment, that's an atrocious way to treat somebody, if he really does exist and has given us everything. Imagine you're brought into the world by your parents. Now, I realise some people have difficult times with their parents, and I don't want to assume that. But imagine you've been brought into the world by loving parents who served you and worked hard so that you could go to a good school and to university, who often made sacrifices for your good. And a lot of what you are today is thanks to those parents and their love for you. And then you said, well, okay, thanks for the start, but I'm now going to continue in my life without any reference to mum and dad. Won't call them, won't listen to them, I won't make any decisions based on what they might have thought or taught me. I'm just going to go into the world entirely alone. That would be a terribly offensive thing to do on a personal level. Not just about doing bad things that God goes tut. It's about breaking a relationship. The relationship we were made for. It's about failing to love the one who supremely is to be loved. And so I have to say to my friend, it's not because I think that I'm this way round on the scales. You know, when it comes to loving God, I think it's more like that. You know, the failures far outweigh the successes. But I have to say to him that my confidence in being forgiven on the last day, of going to paradise forever, isn't based on what I've done or how I've lived. And I think this is something that sets Christianity apart from pretty much any other philosophy that I've come across in life. In Islam, the weighing of the scales. In Hinduism, the accumulation of karma. In some forms actually of Christianity, I think that depart from Jesus' teaching, a kind of religious performance, whether you go to mass enough, whether you say confession enough, whether your attendance at church is enough, and even in actually secularism. There's often a kind of ethic of self-improvement. I will try by myself to better myself. But Christianity, I think, uniquely says that we're in trouble. We said that yesterday. We're in trouble because we haven't lived the way we should have lived. And we haven't loved the God who made us the way we should have loved him. And that is a very serious problem when it comes to Judgment Day. Because God will take account of our rebellion and he will punish us. And yet I promised yesterday that today was going to be the good news, and it really is the good news. Because I was able to say to my Muslim friend on the train, I can be confident if I die tonight, I'm going to paradise because of what happened on the cross. And I will explain that in our time remaining using two Old Testament prophecies, that is, prophecies written many hundreds of years before Jesus, and their fulfillment in the life of Jesus. We haven't talked about this before actually this week. Another stream of evidence as you're looking into Christianity, I think the eyewitnesses are worth looking at, the miracles are worth considering. Another strand of evidence that the predictions made hundreds of years before and the exact way in which they're fulfilled in the life of Jesus. We're going to look at two of them that explain Jesus' death. And I wonder if you can turn over a few pages to towards the end of the Gospel where it talks about Jesus dying and the circumstances leading up to his death. And I wonder if you can turn to page 46. Jesus is having a meal with his disciples, that is a Passover meal. And if you've got Jewish friends, you'll know this is something that Jews continue to celebrate to this day. It was a very important part of their heritage. And Jewish people every year around Easter time celebrate a meal called the Passover. But this Passover is slightly ominous because actually during the meal, as they're sitting down to eat with their friends, Jesus predicts one of you is going to betray me. Which makes the atmosphere tense, to say the least. One of you I'm eating with is about to betray me. You see that at the top of the page. While Jesus and the 12 disciples were eating together that evening, he said, the one who will betray me is now eating with me. This made the disciples sad. I think that's a slightly under-translated word. This made the disciples very awkward, very troubled. Surely you don't mean me, they said. Jesus answered, it's one of you 12 men who is eating from this dish with me. The Son of Man will die just as the scriptures say. But it's going to be terrible for the one who betrays me. That man would be better off if he'd never been born. It's an ominous atmosphere during this dinner, this Passover meal. But it goes on to be even stranger still. Look on how it goes. During the meal, Jesus took some bread in his hands. He blessed the bread and broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, so I'm dishing out, I'm serving, I'm mum, handing out the meal. And he says, take this, it is my body. That's weird, isn't it? That's odd. I don't recommend, dinner party. Oh, I hope you're enjoying the roast. Well, my leg actually. I'm sitting at the table. It's a very odd thing to say. And then he goes on, he picks up the cup of wine and gave thanks to God. He gives it to his disciples. He says, drink this. So they drank some. He said, this is my blood. I imagine him kind of spitting it out again. As you're halfway through sipping, what's this Chateau Neuf to put? No, it's my blood. Very odd. But actually very profound what Jesus is saying. Because to understand it, we need to understand that the background, the Jewish background, written about 1,600 years before in this case, at the time of Moses and the Exodus. And God's people, the Israelites, were slaves in Egypt under a hostile power, under Pharaoh and the Egyptians. In very much way, actually, the Jews of Jesus' day were under a hostile power. The Romans, there's parallels between them. So they were subjugated by this tyrannical power. They were slaves in brutally oppressed in labour camps, and God promised to rescue them from the Pharaoh and to deliver them that they might be his people and be free. And you may know the story about the plagues and the parting of the Red Sea and all that kind of stuff. If you've seen the film Prince of Egypt, you'll know the story. But actually, at the heart of this rescue was a night when God's judgment would come. He warned, I'm going to send my judgment on Egypt. Egypt with its oppressive regime, Egypt with its rebellion against me, Egypt with its failure to love me, its creator, and love your neighbour as yourself. Judgment's coming. Judgment's coming at midnight, and at midnight I will strike down all the firstborn of the land of Egypt. Absolutely terrifying judgment. God comes and every firstborn child dies. Put your hand up if you're the oldest son in your family. Yeah, so at midnight, the next day, none of us alive. Terrifying judgment. But God says that he will provide a means of escape from his judgment when it comes. And what the family had to do was to take a lamb and make it part of the family for 4 days. I guess the kids get to know it, becomes a pet. They give it a pet name, Sean. Probably not, because Boris and Bobbitt wasn't around, but it becomes popular with the kids. And then on the 14th day of the month, they must slaughter the lambs at twilight, as evening falls. And then they have to paint some of the blood of the lamb on the door of their houses, so that when God comes at midnight to destroy, to judge, he says, when I see the blood, I will pass over those homes. And then they sit down, they put the blood on the door, sit down to a meal of roast lamb. And every single year after that, in about 3,400 years ago, Jewish families have been celebrating this meal to remember, because we put blood on the door, God passed over us when his judgment fell. Many Egyptian firstborn died that night. It was a terrible tragedy. But many Israelites were spared from judgment because of the blood on the door. And that meal that they ate every year, some Jewish families still eat it this year, celebrated our rescue from the judgment that we deserve when it comes. Had a meal just to remember God saved us. And that's what this is here. This meal in Jesus' life, well, they had it every year. He was a Jewish teacher with Jewish friends. Just a normal Passover meal, but with an ominous note, one of you will betray me. And then a very strange over-dinner conversation. You're eating my body, you are drinking my blood. Well, some people have misunderstood this early centuries and thought that Christians were cannibals. But actually what Jesus is saying is profound. He's saying that the sacrifice of the lamb and the blood on the door that made you safe all those years ago when God's judgment comes, that was a prophecy in anticipation of what I'm about to do as I die. As I die as a sacrifice, and my blood is, well, not on the door literally, but marks you out, then you will be safe when my judgment comes. I'm dying like the lamb died, so that you can live like the firstborn sons lived. It's a saving death. And he uses the culture that they've had for over 1,000 years to explain what is about to happen. Why must Jesus die? Well, answer number one, because God's judgment's coming, and unless there's blood on the door, we're in enormous danger. Jesus died to mark out those who trust in him, so that judgment would not fall at midnight. And so the question, I guess, for everyone here is, that's true, God's judgment's coming, are you safe? Now, that was the question that really mattered 3,400 years ago. As you sat down for dinner, did you remember to put blood on the door? my guess is that every Israelite household had it splashed everywhere. Because judgment was coming, and only through blood could they be saved. Jesus says, that's about my death, and I must die. Next incident, second Old Testament prophecy, and it's just over the page where it says Jesus prays. So page 46 at the bottom of the page. Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he told them, sit here while I pray. Jesus took along Peter, James and John. He was sad and troubled and told them, I am so sad I feel as if I'm dying. Stay here and keep watch with me. Now I want to suggest that that is quite strange. Again, the translation is a little bit weak. The original Greek says that I'm very troubled. I'm anguishedly troubled. I think that's very odd, because you see, Jesus so far, if you read through these chapters, Jesus has been what I would describe as Mr. In control. In a crisis, Jesus is always calm. For example, back in chapter 4 of Mark, they're in a storm. It's a really serious storm. If you've seen the film The Perfect Storm, I haven't actually seen it. Apparently that's a bad storm. It's that kind of storm. Here are Jesus' disciples, they're experienced Christians, they think they're going to die. We're drowning, they say, we're perishing. And Jesus, during this storm, he's asleep on a cushion. I think that's an amazing picture, isn't it? I saw someone do a cartoon of it for a children's Bible with a boat that was at kind of that angle, and then they managed to catch it on this boat, a little cushion, and Jesus asleep. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing. And he wakes up, and they go, thanks for waking up, Jesus. By the way, we're about to die. And Jesus goes, oh, that's okay, don't worry about the storm. And turns to the wind and the waves and says, quiet. And immediately it's absolutely calm. Extraordinary power over the elements. And the disciples are absolutely terrified. Who is this, they say, that wind and waves obey him? But later on, we talked about this yesterday briefly, Jesus encounters a man possessed of evil spirits. 2,000 evil spirits in this man. No one can control him. He can have supernatural strength to tear away chains. And Jesus meets incredible evil, and just with a word, he instructs the demons to leave the man, and they're destroyed. Jesus is Mr. In control. He doesn't get in a flap. When Jesus is cross-examined by all of the religious minds of the day, all the hostile philosophers, the equivalent of the Richard Dawkinses of the day, trying to trap him in the way that maybe you're going to do in a minute when we get to question time. He's terrified. Jesus wasn't terrified. It's very easy for him. He answered them in a brilliant way, and it confounded their questioning. Mr. In control. And then suddenly he gets to this garden, and we read that Mr. In control is very, very upset under the same statements. Is in anguish. Is terribly troubled. And you've got to ask, why? Why is somebody with that much power to just tell the ways what to do, power to tell evil what to do, a teaching that can confound any other opponent, why is this man terrified? Well, he explains. Look on. Jesus went on a little way, then he knelt down on the ground and prayed, Father, if it's possible, don't let this happen to me. Father, you can do anything. Don't make me suffer by making me drink from this cup. But do what you want and not what I want. But that is odd, isn't it? Of all the things to be terrified of in the world, to be scared of a cup doesn't look the most scary thing. But once again, Jesus is speaking in the light of all of the Jewish history that preceded him, and of prophecies written many hundreds of years before that described something very terrible using the image of a cup. And I'm going to read to you a couple of the passages that would have been in Jesus' mind as he contemplated what was about to happen to him when he went to his death. There's several passages in the Old Testament. I'm just going to choose two because of time. This is the prophet Jeremiah. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me. Take from my hand this cup, filled with the wine of my wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. When they drink it, they will stagger and go mad because of the sword I will send among them. So I took the cup from the Lord's hand. I made all the nations to whom he sent me drink it. Jerusalem and the towns of Judah, its kings and officials, to make them a ruin, an object of horror and scorn and cursing, as they are today. Then tell them, this is what the Lord Almighty, the Lord says. Drink and get drunk and vomit and fall to rise no more because of the sword I will send among you. If they refuse to take the cup from your hand and drink it, tell them, this is what the Lord Almighty says, you must drink it. See, I am beginning to bring disaster on the city that bears my name. And will you go unpunished? You will not go unpunished. I am calling down a sword upon all who live on the earth, declares the Lord Almighty. Here it is in the prophet Ezekiel. This is what the sovereign Lord says. You will drink your sister's cup, a cup large and deep. It will bring scorn and derision. It holds so much. You'll be filled with drunkenness and sorrow, the cup of ruin and desolation. You will drink it and drain it dry. You will dash it to pieces and tear your breasts. I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. Since you have forgotten me and thrust me behind your back, you must bear the consequences. Now, it's a terrifying picture. Many people object to it. How could a God of love say such a thing? But God is very clear in the Bible that he is angry about evil. He hates evil. He will punish evil. And in these prophecies of the Old Testament, the idea of his punishment is likened to a cup containing his anger distilled down to a liquid that when you drink it, it expresses in you all of the consequences, all of God's indignation against your sins. And Jesus is in the garden saying to God, I am terrified about drinking this cup. But it's very strange, isn't it? Because this is the cup, the Bible says, makes very clearly, this is the cup reserved for those who have done evil, for the wicked of the earth. And Jesus is somebody who's always done good. One of the awkward things about Jesus actually is you're assessing your own moral performance. It's just how much he shows us up. He's a man who never lied, who was never conceited, who never failed to serve another. He was a man full of compassion for everybody. He was a man who had no favourites amongst the highly established, but hang out with the lowly and the nobody. He was somebody who always loved God with all of his heart, his mind, his soul, his strength, and who always loved his neighbour as himself, something none of us have done. So if Jesus does have a cup at all, it should be like this. This is the cup with all the judgment that you deserve in it, nothing. But the reason that Jesus is terrified is because, as he explains in Mark's account in chapter 10, his death would be a ransom for us. It would be a swap, be a substitution. You see, this is what Jesus deserves, and this is what I deserve, because of all the moral filth and the things that I'm so ashamed of that you don't know about, but if you did, you wouldn't be listening to me now. All the consequences of the things I've done that a holy God has noticed and can't stand. And Jesus says, why don't I take it for you? Why don't we swap? Why don't we do this? Jesus' cup, my cup. That is an astonishing message. That there is a God who loved us so much that he would send his Son to die instead of us. Not unwillingly, not mechanistically, it's not just a neat theological formula, but lovingly, deliberately, even though he was terrified of us. Let's go to Jerusalem, he says. We looked at the beginning. Let's go. What, Jerusalem? When you get to Jerusalem, they're going to kill you. Yes, exactly, he says. Let's go to Jerusalem, where I'll be handed over to the chief priests. They'll condemn me, flog me, spit on me, and kill me. Let's go. Why, Jesus? Why will you die like this? Well, because I want to give my life as a ransom for others. I want to give my life to be the Passover sacrifice, that my blood might mark them out, and God's judgment might pass over on the day that it comes. I want to drink the cup that they deserve, in order that they might have no consequences of evil to exclude them from my perfect heaven. I think it's appropriate to speak on this a day after Valentine's Day, because I don't know of love like this anywhere else in the world. Maybe you said it yesterday with flowers, maybe you said it with chocolates, but Jesus said it with his life. And a life died instead of ours, that we might be forgiven. But at the last day, when God weighs the deeds in the scales and they're like that, he might say, well, Jesus has swapped with you and his scales are like this. Welcome to paradise. Thanks so much for listening. I'm going to hand back over. We're going to do questions and stuff.
Guys, we would love to have your feedback on this event and on any events this week. Please take the form in front of you, which you'll see, and the pen in front of you as well, and fill it out now. Just take a moment to fill it out. I'm going to do it as well. It's got your comments. That can be anything to do with the talk, the location, the publicity, anything. Be as honest as you like. Then you've got your name and your email and mobile. That's quite self-explanatory. But if you would like us to follow up, then please do make sure you give us those details. And tick the box if you would like to talk more about what you've heard as well. And yeah, in front of you there'll be another slip, Christianity Explored course. This is advertising a 5-week course, which is happening on Tuesday evening, starting next week. It's in Bar Humbug on White Ladies Road, 7:45 for an 8 o'clock start. It's a chance to explore more about the Christian faith. If you have any questions, queries, debates, anything you'd like to bring to the table, then come along. It's informal, it's relaxed, and you can just explore more about the Jesus that we've been talking about. So yeah, please do take the pens and the forms and fill them out now, and then put them in their box at the back of the room on your way out. That'd be really helpful. We do value your feedback. We're going to take questions now. So, Andrew, if you'd like to come back up, that'd be excellent. Guys, I realised at the start that I didn't mention the number up there. I don't think I've got any text messages, any questions, but I will take questions from the floor. So please, may you put up your hand if you have a question.
Yeah, very good. First of all, I know this is more relevant to the debate that we had 2 days ago, but there's no historical evidence based here. I'm sorry about that. But I don't want to argue about that because that's a different debate. What I would like to say, because I do accept Jesus as a historical figure, as most serious historians and scholars do. What I want to know is, first of all, are you familiar with this? There's a movement that's actually called Christian atheists. I know it sounds a bit mental, but they believe, because as I'm sure you do, the foundation of Christianity is the teachings of Jesus Christ. So why can't you accept that story? It's a powerful story, it's a very moral story. Why can't you accept Jesus as a moral teacher without the supernatural component? Why can't we look at this guy and go, this is a good guy, I would like to live my life like that, without this totalitarian deity making sure he don't do that?
Okay, thank you. So I think there was a statement and a question. I think I'm going to exercise my right to reply to a statement as you've done for me. So the statement is there's no historical evidence for anything I've said, which I want to take issue with. That won't surprise you. But the question is, can't you have Jesus' moral teachings without the supernatural bit about God? Yeah. So that's 2 things. I do disagree that there's no historical evidence, and I submit to you that this is some that deserves to be taken seriously. So it's a 1st century source document. One of 4 biographies of Jesus that date from the same time that he lived, the same place where he lived. And so this is primary source. This is a source that needs to be taken seriously historically. Actually, there's also attestation, if you just mean Jesus' death, there's attestation also in Roman historical sources that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Palestine. So I disagree. I think there is historical evidence to be taken seriously. Monday we talked a bit more about that. I think we might record it, even though we forgot to record it at the time. We might redo it if people want to listen to the website, or post something on the Facebook about that. But that, as I said, that's another time. Can't you just take Jesus' moral teachings without the supernatural stuff? I think you can't if you want to, in any sense, be faithful to what he himself was teaching. So you go do a pair of scissors and take out when he says something moral and cut out all those bits and put them in one one pile, and every time he says something about God, but in another pile. But this pile would be quite a lot bigger than that pile by the end of it. So I think it would be untrue to what Jesus himself believed and meant to do that. So absolutely fundamental to what Jesus taught about morality was the belief that there is a God who made us, who ultimately is the one that we wrong when we do something wrong. So Jesus' summary of the law was, as I alluded to, love God with all your heart, mind, soul and strength. And the second most important thing is love your neighbour. And you're basically saying, can't I just take the second one? Isn't it enough that we love each other? Well, in a world where there's no God, if there is no God, then probably the most important thing to do is we are the highest species that's evolved by accident, makes sense that we should look after ourselves. So yeah, evolve a kind of system of pragmatic ethics that looks after human beings, and that would be the best you can do because that's all there is. If there's no God, that would make sense. If there is a God, if there's a God who made us, if there's a God who's in control of history, the God who's in charge of science, more about that tonight, who actually can do the miraculous, unusual it may be, then actually how we respond to that God becomes the most important thing in the life. And so basically what you're saying is, can't I take Jesus within this worldview, there's no God, rather than in this one, there's a God who made us and made everything. And I suppose I'm saying, that would be as unfair as reading Richard Dawkins in a Christian way. You know, I'll say he's operating in this world over here, and which one? I forgot which one they are now. Whichever it was. I'll think that one over there. I'm going to say I'm going to interpret you within this world. That's not being true to what he means or what he says. I think the question's got to be, which view of the world is true? So are we in a world where we just came back by chance, where there's no God, in which case Jesus cannot have done the miracles because they would be impossible, and must be no more than an insightful teacher who was mainly wrong because he believed in God? Or are we in a world where everything that we have, every breath we breathe, is a gift of a God who made us and loves us? And that God has stepped into history in the person of Jesus and wants to tell us about how we can be rescued. And if that's true, then atheism is really wrong. See, they're absolutely diametrically opposed views of the world. And what you've got to do, if you're open-minded, Christian or non-Christian, you've got to ask which is right. But I think to assume I'm going to be an atheist first and then try and squeeze Jesus into my atheism, I don't think he fits. I think you've got to say, Jesus, you're wrong, you're an atheist, you think there's a God, you think you are that God, you're one of the most naive and wrong people there's ever been, if atheism is true. Or, actually, as I look at Jesus, I find that my atheism is challenged and I need to submit to his alternative view. But I don't think you can have both. Thank you. Nathan, as usual, asked a very insightful question. Anyone else got? Yes.
You were talking earlier about kind of heaven and hell and who will be saved, and that really causes quite a big problem because I don't believe in God, and so according to the Christian view, if I were to die now, I would not be saved. I would go straight to eternal damnation or all the rest of it. So what you're essentially saying is that we're putting our kind of moral faith into who's essentially someone who's planned and who has determined me not to believe in him, and he's determined me to suffer eternally. So really, why should we put our kind of moral faith into who is essentially a sadistic brute? Would be my question.
Okay, thank you. So the question is God a sadistic brute for planning judgment on the world? I want to say, as we're supposed you know, but I also want to say I think that's a caricature that isn't quite fair of what the Bible's saying about judgment. So the Bible is very honest that there is going to be a judgment day, which will include everyone who's lived, atheist or Christian or Hindu or whatever, will all stand before Jesus, and he will decide the consequences that are fair and due to us for how we've lived. But the Bible says that he doesn't do that in a kind of arbitrary way, like God is longing to punish everyone because he thinks that's fun. In fact, quite the opposite. The Bible says that God in Judgment Day does what justice requires because he is wholly committed to good and he is wholly against evil. And the criterion that he will use for judgment, according to the New Testament, is to quote, he will give to each person according to what they've done. So if you lived a perfectly good life and you've always loved God and loved your neighbour, then of course he will acquit you because he's a just God. But if there is in our lives moral evil and corruption, it will mean its consequences. And I think that's a good thing, actually. It's like, to going to a court in the Old Bailey and someone's guilty and the judge says, because I'm a nice guy, I'm not going to punish you. That would trouble me, because justice is a thing worth having. And that's true of a human court. It's even more true of the court of the universe. Because if God doesn't care about the difference between good and evil, then they don't matter. But God does hate evil, and he will judge it. So the criterion on Judgment Day isn't, I hope I can get as many people as I can, but it's, I must do what is right with good and evil. And actually, the Bible describes God as being terribly sad about the way we've turned our back on him, and grieved at our refusal to come back to him. So Jesus, looking at Jerusalem, the city that he come to, turning their back on God, and he weeps for them. So Jerusalem, Jerusalem, why will you continue to refuse to come together and to know God again? So he doesn't do it with a kind of capricious joy. That's just a character that doesn't match. But, and just the last bit of the question, I suppose we're in trouble not because we don't believe in Jesus. That's not the main reason we're in trouble. We're in trouble because we've done what's wrong. And so if on the last day God does this fairly, as my Muslim friend saw, we're in trouble. And what Jesus is offering us is a wonderful rescue that we don't deserve from the consequences that would be fair of our actions. And I think that's brilliant news. And far from determining you to go to hell, God is offering you a chance of forgiveness and pardon and relationship with him. Which I think is brilliant news. And that, you see what I mean? This is an opportunity right now, even though you might think not. Judgment is real, but God is not capricious or enjoying of it. Which is why else would Jesus go and do something he was terrified of? To spare us from consequences that he believed to be true and right. Thank you.
I thought it was quite interesting that we actually got laughter when you said it's taking Dawkins' point of view and putting it in a religious context. I would like to think that most people in this room believe in that reflection and Darwinism. If they don't, I despair. But there's also a lot.
I'd like to think most people in this room believe that the God who made them, if I did it, they despair. But yeah.
Okay, well, there's a lot of people from Red Lilies here as well. So if you say to assume, there's a lot of people in here who are Christians who do take Dawkins' viewpoint, which I think is just corrosive design, corrosive to religious belief, just like sorry nature, and trying to fit it into their God encouraged all this, God was spinning around.
Yes. Thank you for unwittingly a brilliant trailer for this evening. Or maybe not unwittingly, maybe you know that's evening. But no, that is that question. I don't think I want to say that natural selection is Dawkins' idea. I mean, he doesn't have a monopoly on science. I think that's one that will be challenging this evening. The idea that as soon as you believe in anything sciencey, you must believe in everything Dawkinsy. There's lots of Christians who are scientists who do good science, and so I don't think that a scientific idea is automatically the preserve of an atheistic philosophy. That's one of the more challenge. But yes, to ask the question of what does science tell us, and how do these two big views of the world compare, that's what we'll be doing tonight. So please come if you can.
I got a text just now. I don't know if you want to
saying,
answer.
can you come for tea, Charlie?
I don't know if you want to answer this now or afterwards, but it asked you, how did you become a Christian?
Yeah, sure. I can answer that now. So I arrived at Cambridge, first year doing natural sciences, with a worldview similar to Dawkins, I guess. Probably not as thought through, but that was basically my view. I was very cynical about religion because I'd grown up with it in the kind of worst kind of hypocritical. We do nice stuff on Sundays. We do what we want the rest of the time. And as a teenager, I hated that kind of hypocrisy. And I could sort of see through it. It was fake. And I was doing science, and I thought that maybe that's got all the answers. I arrived at Cambridge. I met some Christians who didn't fit my stereotype of Christians. They were supposed to be stupid and hypocritical, and these people were intelligent. And I admired the way that they lived. It was unlike how I'd seen people treat others before. That struck me and bothered me. then they told me, it didn't make me think they were right, but it intrigued me. Then they told me that they thought Jesus was a historical person who really lived, and that faith was a matter of investigating, checking out, and putting your confidence in evidence, rather than closing your eyes and making a wistful jump. And that was a real shock to me. I'd never realised it was a historical question. I thought it was about whether you liked stained glass window, and I didn't. But so I just began to look into it. I started to look into some of the historical stuff. I read one of these. I basically then, I don't know where we are now, we're probably in about December or so, my first year. I basically thought, this might be true. This makes a lot of sense. This stands up. But at the same time as that, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I hope this isn't true, because this will wreck my life. And basically, increasingly, those kind of two things happen to me at the same time. I think this is really true. I think my atheism doesn't make much sense. I think what these Christians do does make sense. But if I follow them, it will wreck my life. And I honestly thought that following Jesus would mess up my life. I thought what he had to say about sex, and about money, and about career, and I thought that would wreck my life. And so I had this awful situation of thinking it was true and wanting it not to be true, and basically hiding from it. So I managed successfully for about 6 months, avoiding any Christian. They weren't wearing this, it wasn't as easy to spot them. I worked out who most of them were, and I tried to avoid them. And it was actually in a conversation with an atheist friend one night, and we said, look, what is life for? What's our life about? We didn't know, he couldn't give me an answer, and I thought the Christians do know. I think the answer's right, but I think God wants to wreck my life. And the final step for me wasn't, is this true? Did it happen? I thought, yes. But is this God good? Does he love me? Is he for me? Can I trust him? And they're not quite the same question, I think. Yes, Jesus was true, but was he good? And my final penny dropping, which is an obvious thing really, was that if Jesus gave up his life so that I could be forgiven, and did that not in a kind of theological formula way, but in a genuinely terrified about what faced him, yet committed to do so out of love for me, then my idea that he would do that only to give me a kind of rubbish life doesn't make any sense at all. Somebody who loves you that much can do so only because they love you. And I'd say my testimony has been, being a Christian, 16 or so years, it's been a great thing to do. It's been a great thing. Following Jesus, far from being a restrictive slavery, has been a great joy. And the times in my life that have been most painful over the last 16 years have been the time that I didn't follow him. And I thought I'd experiment again with how it would be to live my own way. And it's always been worse. So yeah, that's my story. So I thought it was true, didn't want it to be true. Was on the run for a long time. Thank you.
Should we close it there? Guys, thank you again. It's quite challenging stuff. If you want to come back tomorrow, there's another lunch bar on what if Jesus defeats death. What if Jesus defeated death? That's going to be another hefty one probably. And then this evening there is a talk in Wills, up in Stoke Bishop, the Wills Conference Centre, that is entitled "Do Atheists Make Bad Scientists?" Do come along, do bring your questions, and we look forward to seeing you at some of those events hopefully. See you soon.